What's happening, guys? Good evening, welcome back. Thank you all for joining again. I am a little bit croaky today, and it is all self-inflicted after last night's football. I mean, I'm not going to dwell on the football, but I must say I'm heartbroken. I'm gutted, but I'm really proud of the team. If you're not into football, you're not from the UK or certainly not from England, you won't care at all about the football. But this stuff doesn't happen to us very often. We got so close. And yeah, today I've been really suffering. So those of you that have just been saying Josh Smith and Slipstream Sims in the chat there, thank you for doing these streams, even though you're so busy. Thank you, I appreciate it. I do these streams because I love it so much. Today, it nearly didn't happen, not because I was so busy, but because I could barely keep my eyes open. But anyway, enough of that. If football's not coming home, at least, as I saw someone else write in the chat earlier on, at least F1's coming home this week. It's back at Silverstone, the British Grand Prix, and there is so much to talk about because it's not like any other British Grand Prix we've had before. There was, as I put in my tweet a moment ago, those who saw that, there is so much to talk about and to look forward to ahead of this weekend. We've got sprint qualifying, of course. We'll get into all of that. I've got all the details. If you've got any questions, yes, and by the way, I know that lots of you are from Italy. Congratulations. Gust, I see you there. Yes, I know you care. You're from Italy. Congrats. Italy were the better team. You deserved the win on the day, but yes, enough football. So sprint qualifying. Get your questions in about any of that over the course of this weekend. Anything you want to know about how the schedule changes, what happens, what the challenges are for the teams or drivers. We'll cover all of that. We've got brand new tyres. With a new construction, tyres from Pirelli for this weekend as well, that no one's had a chance to try out in a race weekend, other than that very little, we had half an hour, I think, to trial them in Austria, in amongst all the other stuff that people were doing back then. And Mercedes are bringing an upgrade package to their car. They said they were not going to continue development on their car, but they had some stuff already in the pipeline. That comes to Silverstone. There are some major hopes being pinned on that upgrade. And of course, there's loads more. We get the brand new, or the unveiling of a full-size 2022 car on Thursday. I think many people have seen it. It was leaked on Twitter a while ago, so it has been doing the rounds. I don't think there's many surprises. But when I saw the pictures, as I'm sure many of you did, I thought it looked great. I thought it looks like a really good-looking, attractive car. Excuse me. So all of that coming up over the next few days. Plus, of course, it's the British Grand Prix with 140,000 fans on Sunday. So the atmosphere will be fantastic. So it should be really good. The weather's looking all right too. I want to hear from you if you're going. I know lots of you already been chatting in the chat earlier on, saying you're looking forward to going, you're packing the things up. I think it's going to be a spectacular weekend. So fair play to you if you're heading down there. Right, hello to everybody. Thank you very much for joining once again. I'm going to say it now because it'll get later on in the video and I'll forget to do it. Hit that like button. I know you might not have had decided whether you like the video or not yet, but at some point throughout this video, if you like what you see, just hit the like button. It only takes a moment and it's worthwhile doing for me. Right, where should we start then? Shall we start sprint races? Because that's probably the biggest thing for this weekend, isn't it? Biggest change to the rules. It's a trial. They're going to be doing it at 3 different rounds this year. The other one will be Italy, and most likely it looks like Austin as well. So they're going to be three trials of this, and it really is just a trial to see whether it works, to see what happens. It's not something that's set in stone. Even the format that we'll be trialling this weekend is not set in stone. It could be tweaked, it could be scrapped, or it could be changed up and added to, or have some bits taken away or changed. So it's definitely not set in stone, and we need to remember that before complaining or moaning or being negative about it. Personally, I think I'm really excited just to see what happens, because it's a trial, it's an experiment, because we don't know what the outcome's going to be. That's interesting to me. That means that we've got something unknown. And how many times over the last few years have we headed into Grand Prix weekends desperate for an unknown, desperate for something out of the ordinary to happen? Well, we've got it this weekend. So let's see. Hello to all of you saying that you're off to Silverstone. Amazing. I mean, it is going to be an epic weekend. So congratulations for you guys for getting hold of your tickets, holding out this long to get back to a Grand Prix. I think it's going to be spectacular. So sprint races. Right, we've got, what happens is now we have a Friday morning practice of 1 hour. That's a free practice as we always have. We then, in fact, it's Friday afternoon, isn't it? It's not in the morning. Then we go into what is pretty much a standard qualifying that normally happens on a Saturday, will now be happening on the Friday. The normal 3 different rounds, qualifying 1, 2 and 3, but this time around there'll be free choice of tyres all the way through qualifying. The idea being that teams, that they're encouraging teams to absolutely just go for it, not trying to tee up strategy, which you would obviously normally do when you're qualifying ahead of the Grand Prix. You might want to qualify on medium tyres rather than soft tyres, for example, on a Saturday. Well, this weekend for qualifying, which happens on Friday evening, you have free choice of tyres. So it's going to be all out, go for the softs, get your fastest lap possible in. Now that, of course, that qualifying sets the grid for Saturday's sprint race. But before that, there's another practice session on Saturday morning of 1 hour. Now, Parc Fermé, this is what's interesting, and we'll cover this in a moment, but Parc Fermé kicks in as qualifying on the Friday starts. So on Friday evening, same as it does on Saturday at the moment, when the cars roll out the garage, they are in Parc Fermé. That means that whatever you have locked in off the one single practice session on Friday morning, whatever you've figured out about tyre temperature, about cooling setups for engine and brakes and those kind of things, and given that we're on a brand new type of tyre construction, there's a lot to figure out in that 1 hour practice session before you lock the cars into Parc Fermé for qualifying. Then you go through quali, you set your grid for Saturday's sprint race. We then come back in on Saturday where we have another 1 hour practice. Now, Parc Fermé is released whilst the cars are in that session. So you are allowed to make changes to your setup over the course of the Saturday practice session. And then you come out of that session and you're locked back into Parc Fermé again, ready for the start of that sprint race. So for the engineers, for the mechanics, for the teams, there is very little time to figure out all the stuff you have to figure out. And, over that short period of just 2 hours where you have limited amount of change ahead of a sprint race, but then the Grand Prix on a Sunday as well. So it's a proper challenge for everybody around here. We then go into the sprint race, which is 100 kilometres. Not sure, I haven't figured out how many laps that is yet, but 100 kilometre sprint race. And this is really where we want to talk about what we think is going to happen here, because there's been lots of people saying it's going to be a procession because nobody wants to risk having an accident and destroying their grid position for Sunday's Grand Prix, and I think that's probably a valid argument. But on the other hand, you've got racing drivers who desperately want to win, who desperately want to get past and make up positions, because as well as losing places, you have the potential to win places as well for your starting position on Sunday. So that's Saturday, and then we get into Sunday, which is a standard Grand Prix. Sprint race, there's no pit stops, or certainly no mandatory pit stops. There is no mandatory tyre change. So it's an all-out sprint to get your, around the 100 kilometres as fast as you possibly can. Let's just jump into some of your questions. First of all, could we see some tyre safety issues over the weekend? Well, that's a big part of the reason they're bringing this new construction of tyre to make sure that they overcome that. They were desperate to get the new tyre in before Silverstone because we know we've had issues there in the past. So in theory, that's what the tyre's for, is to make sure we don't have that kind of issue. Will DRS be used in the sprint race? That's a good question, and I think it does. In fact, yes, it does. So I still think you have the same thing, not for the first 3 laps, but then we get DRS after that. So yes, that's same as we know at the moment. How will the new tyres help? The new tyres are a different construction. Essentially, off the back of the Baku incidents, it was deemed that the construction of the tyre, so that's the sort of that's the way they are made, the construction of the way they're made, not the compounds, not the way the rubber interacts and gives grip, but how the tyre holds up under the various different loads of cornering and lateral forces. So they have beefed those up. So essentially we had a failure between the sidewall and the tread in Baku because there was so much flex at different times, or oscillation, or whatever they call it, a lateral standing wave, I think Pirelli called it in their press release, that was essentially shaking the sidewalls of the tyre, and that load was so great that they failed. Beefing up the construction, which is what they've done for these tyres, should protect against that. That's the idea. In terms of how it transforms the way the cars behave, it shouldn't give too much of an issue, but it will give some difference. It has to, because they are different by their very nature. And so the teams will have to figure out how their car behaves on them, how they manage to keep them or get them into the right temperature window and then keep them there. These are all things that have to be figured out in that very short practice session over the course of Friday morning or Friday afternoon. Do they start the race in the same order they qualify? Yes, so Friday's qualifying sets the grid. So if you get pole position, you start on pole position for Saturday's sprint race. If you win Saturday's sprint race, you start Sunday's Grand Prix in pole position. There's no reverse grids. It is literally the fastest man starts at the front, the slowest guy starts at the back in each of the different stages of the weekend. The commentators are going to have fun. Yeah, they are going to have fun keeping track and chatting about all the permutations. It's going to take some figuring out, that's for sure. But I think it should be quite good. But anyway, what do you think of this? Are you worried about it? Are you excited about it? Are you thinking that it's a waste of time and we don't need it? Are you intrigued by what's going to happen? Because that's how I feel. I do have this concern that we may not get the excitement that we hoped from a sprint race because of this idea that there's so much on the line. You know, when you're racing on a Sunday, of course there's still a lot on the line, but you know, if you fall out the race, you know, you're out that race, but you come back next week, there's no knock-on effect to that. All right, you've lost your points and everything else, so it is serious enough. But on this particular sprint race, and by the way, there are points for the top 3 in the sprint race on Saturday too. But in this particular sprint race, if you spin off, if you go for a big lunge and overtake and wipe yourself out or spin off into the gravel, you could start the race on Sunday last. And that, of course, makes it very, very difficult if you're in a championship fight, even if you're in the midfield, you know. So are you willing to risk that kind of move, or do you just play it safe, hoping that you can start in a safe position, even if it may not be on pole, because it's not worth taking the risk and the potential consequences of getting that wrong? So those are all things that we will figure out. I have a slight concern that that's how it will play, but these are racing drivers, and I don't know any racing driver that won't go for a gap if he sees one. So let's see. I love the change, but I fear it will be boring, says Blue August. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, a concern that a few people have, absolutely. Very excited for this weekend. Action on 3 days instead of just 2, says RJ Wilkie. I couldn't agree more. That's one of the big pluses for it. So if you are going to Silverstone, you get competitive action on each of the 3 days, which is brilliant. Goose Home says, I don't like it. It's making the weekend too mandatory to watch. Well, you know, that is part of the reason for doing this, isn't it? It's partly so that, you know, the circuit promoters or the race promoters can sell tickets on a Friday. If this were to be rolled out at more events, of course, it's selling tickets because you've got a competitive session, selling, you know, people on television watching. And yes, it does mean you're probably having to commit to a lot more watching of Grand Prix week, Grand Prix viewing, but that's, of course, what F1 wants. Which pole position will be recognised to statistics from qualifying or the sprint winner? So that's a good question, and I'm pretty sure, and I haven't actually had this confirmed. I did ask somebody recently, but I haven't had it confirmed. The pole position from the sprint race, so the position you start the Grand Prix in, that will be the pole position that counts in the statistics. Although I would imagine in many history books there will be some little asterisk to say that somebody got pole in a sprint race situation. But in terms of the history books, whoever starts the Grand Prix from pole, because they won the sprint race, I think that will count as the pole position as we know it. Let me see. Less viewers to watch quali due to being at work, though. Yeah, I mean, that may well be the case. There will be a lot of people. But then also they've pushed the whole timetable back. So on Friday, qualifying will be, I've got a feeling, I think I'm right in saying it starts at 7 p.m, 6 or 7 p.m. So they have shuffled the weekend timing around as well to overcome that. So it's an evening qualifying as opposed to an afternoon qualifying that we're used to. Artist Ice, I hope sprint race stays a clean race. Absolutely. Can you explain the tyre rules? Must the Q tyre be used for the sprint race or the Sunday race? Okay, so
for the sprint race, you can start the race on whatever tyre you want, and you don't need to change it during the Grand Prix. So you can start, it's total free choice. And also on the qualifying on the Friday, you also have free choice of tyres. And so, what you're going to do is when it comes to the meaningful laps, you will obviously use the soft tyre, I would imagine, because that's going to be the quickest one, unless we get some anomaly with temperatures. But so it's free choice, essentially. When it comes to the race on Sunday, you also have free choice of tyre to start the Grand Prix. However, the mandatory pit stop, of course, still applies in Sunday's Grand Prix. All right, JBT says, in the UK, won't it be really cold for the tyres with a 6 p.m. quali? It shouldn't be, no. I mean, I know this is the UK, and I've just been outside in an absolute thunderstorm here, but it's actually reasonably warm, certainly for UK temperatures. So I think actually the weather's getting better towards the weekend, so I think it actually is going to be quite a warm weekend, I hope. Right, what's the weather forecast? Yeah, I think it is nice. I think it's sunny and dry, I think, but it was a couple of days ago when I last looked. It is the UK, could change at any time. So yes, confirmation then, qualifying on Friday is at 6 p.m. if you're in the UK, 7 p.m. if you're in Europe. Hang on, right, here we go. Going to be at Silverstone for the 3 days. Cannot wait, says Matt Franklin. Mate, I can't. I totally get that. I'm sure you can't wait. It's going to be epic. Coming off the back of, certainly here in the UK, we've had an epic summer of sport. We just had the Wimbledon finals this weekend. We've obviously had the European Championships, the football, which England did incredibly well. There's a wave of positivity around sport in the UK right now. And the British Grand Prix, hopefully in the sunshine, with 140,000 fans, should absolutely follow that on. So I think it's going to be an epic weekend. We've got all this stuff to look forward to as well in terms of changes. 26 degrees this weekend, says Will185. Thank you for that. So there you go. So I think it should be a really, really good weekend. I'm massively looking forward to it. Should be warm and dry, says Evan Chippington. Thank you. Yeah. Can you get penalties and penalty points in a sprint race? Yes, you can, because you can get those at any point over any weekend. So you could get them in a Friday practice session. So you certainly get penalty points if you have an infringement, and you can even have a penalty that you pick up on a Friday in a practice session that could then be applied during the Grand Prix. So absolutely, you're under racing conditions during the sprint race, even though it's only 20 laps. If you have a driving infringement, you might find yourself with a 5 or 10 second penalty. Of course, there's no pit stop, so that would just be applied at the end of the Grand Prix. Richard says, should we move on to this? Russell to Marc announced this weekend. Do you know what? I lots of talk, isn't there, about Russell being signed to Mercedes, and that we'll hear about this fairly soon. It is the British Grand Prix. It would seem perfect to announce 2 British drivers for your team for next year at the British Grand Prix weekend, wouldn't it, if it was going to be Hamilton and George Russell? However, that sort of overlooks the fact that surely they have to make the announcement about Valtteri Bottas first, and I'm not sure that that they would do that the other way round. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of talk now about George Russell being Lewis Hamilton's teammate next year. I think let's wait for the announcement whenever it comes. But yeah, it would be a sort of fairy tale, wouldn't it, to make a thing out of a team that has 2 British drivers next year to be announced at the British Grand Prix. Lando Norris almost got a penalty point for streaming on Twitch during the race weekend. Yeah, Lando. So Lando, he was at 10 penalty points after the Austrian Grand Prix. He's actually lost 2 now, but he's down to 8 points now. 4 away from a ban, and he will have at least 8 points until I think it's November is when the next points come off his license. So, there's a lot of talk right now about, whether you should be liable for a ban with lots of these minor infringements just building up. Sergio Perez, I think, is also on 8 points at the moment. So a couple of drivers that do have to sort of keep an eye on things and just be a little bit careful. But it would be a real shame if somebody like Lando, who's definitely not an unfair driver, he's a clean driver, he's made some mistakes, not saying any of these penalties weren't justified, some of them definitely were, but if he ends up with a 1 race ban off the back of a lot of those little misdemeanours, some might argue that that's slightly unfair. Will any teams run a sprint setup to get glory on a Saturday knowing they can't get up the grid on a Sunday? So that's exactly the same really, isn't it, as qualifying, the way we do qualifying right now. You could build a car or set up a car to be really quick in qualifying over one lap, but it would be an awful race car. So you could still do that. Teams, if they wanted to go for a glory one on Saturday, could do that. I mean, it's not going to take an Alfa Romeo to pole position, but it could gain you a few spots up the grid. But then you just lose out massively on a Sunday, and it would be the same in this sprint race. You could potentially start your qualifying on a Friday with 1 lap pace, go into sprint, with a decent grid position, go into the sprint race from a decent starting position, not really worried about looking after tyres or strategy, and then go for a decent result on a Saturday. But then when it comes to Sunday, because you're in Parc Ferme and there's no changing the car setup between the two, you'd be screwed. It'd be a waste of your time. So I can't see anyone doing that at all, to be honest. I'd say a few teams will run a sprint setup. It's just going to be a compromise. You can't just go all out sprint setup because you'll just, you just kill yourself on Sunday. Did you go to Goodwood at the weekend? I didn't go to Goodwood. It's the first year for ages actually that I wasn't there, and I was gutted really. It's a great event. Always love going, but yeah, it wasn't working this weekend. So and didn't really have a reason to get down there, and lots of other reasons not to go because of the amount of stuff we've got going on here. Maria Holland says, I think points on the licence should be for major or dangerous incidents and not these minor infringements. Yeah, there's a lot of drivers now starting to raise a question about whether this should be reviewed. Certainly when we start getting towards the realms of a ban because of a number of really minor infringements, you might have to start questioning that. How many tyres will the winner finish on this year? Michael Noyce. Let's hope all 4. Should Formula 1 try a Formula E qualifying type, says Carlos Freyd. So Formula E do this really, it works really well in Formula E, where they send out the drivers in small groups in championship order. And so the guys who are leading the championship, they go out first. And the guys who are last in the championship go out last in qualifying. And what happens is, and this is why this is kind of specific to Formula E, is that Formula E races typically on street circuits that are very green, very dirty, dusty, and there's hardly any rubber down because they're not racetracks. And then what happens is over qualifying, the circuit evolves massively, meaning that the guys who are going out last end up with a much faster racetrack because everyone else has put rubber down over the course of qualifying. In Formula 1, I don't think that would work the same way because you don't have the same circuit evolution as you do on a street track that Formula E races on. So it works in Formula E really well. I'm just not sure it would have the same effect in F1. I'm sure Alonso is looking forward to the sprint race. Gio and Danny Rick also usually make up places early on. So look, what's going to happen here, or what I think is going to happen here, is that you're going to start to see a massive way up, as there always is, but perhaps even more so here, a way up of risk versus reward. And you might start to get a little insight into the kind of drivers, and depending on their championship position, in the past we've seen Max Verstappen not really have anything to lose in races because he was never going to win the championship and he had so much of a gap behind him in the most part that he wasn't really under threat. So he could afford to be really bold with his racing and make some massive lunges and some bold overtakes and be a bit braver with strategy or whatever. Now he's in a championship hunt where he can't afford to lose points. He cannot afford to give up places because it could literally affect his championship. So you might see a change in mindset. We're probably already seeing a change in mindset with Max. And Lewis is probably in that same sort of boat. But there will be others who either feel they have less to lose or more to gain, or that they are bigger and bolder on the brakes like a Daniel Ricciardo has been in the past, that you might see those strengths in a sprint race coming more towards the fore, where maybe it's the overtake that as a skill that is more powerful or more beneficial during that period than the 1 lap pace that of course qualifying is normally focused on. So it is going to be interesting, and that's what I'm looking forward to finding out. Lance Stroll's a big lap one mover too. Yeah, he is. In fact, there's a few drivers, aren't there, that actually typically do very well. Kimi's often done very well in the first laps as well. Are you hanging around with the McLaren boys this weekend? I'm actually only at Silverstone on the Friday, so if you are going, do hit me up on social. I will be around for all of the afternoon and into the evening. So yeah, let me know. I will be happy to say hi to as many of you as I can. Yeah, just on the Friday, then I'm home again. Right, where are we? Hang on. I was thinking that George Russell, who fades through races, but had been doing better on a Saturday recently. So George Russell, of course, we call him Mr. Saturday because his one lap pace, what he can get out of that car over a lap in qualifying, has been epic. I wonder, that will happen now on the Friday, so he'll get this epic. Well, hopefully we'll get this epic Friday performance from George, and hopefully get a decent start in the sprint race, and then over a 20-lap sprint race, anything can happen there. And because we might have this idea of people not wanting to take too many risks, if George Russell can qualify around the top 10, 11, 12, which is typically or quite often where he seems to find himself on a good day, if he can get excuse me, this is all hangover related, so I don't expect any sympathy. If George Russell can find himself, sorry, not around 10 to 12, but if he can get himself into the Q2 positions, maybe on the brink of a Q3, there's nothing to say that he might not be able to stay and hold those positions in the race if people are being a little bit less aggressive. And maybe for George, that's one of those opportunities where the people around him might have more to lose than him on a Saturday. So look, I think it's going to be great to find out. Russell to get points on Saturday, says Josh Smith. Absolutely, could well do. Mind you, to get points on a Saturday, I think it's only the top three that only get the points in the sprint qualifying sprint race. So he'd do well to get into the top three. I'd love to say hi. If I see you there, it says Will185. Well, I'd love to see you too, mate, so do shout. Do you think this is Kimi's last season? I've thought this has been Kimi's last season for the last 10 years now. I do think that there's a lot of talk, isn't there, about Mick Schumacher potentially replacing him at Alfa Romeo, but and it would seem like a sensible move if you're Ferrari, with Mick Schumacher being a young Ferrari driver, to shuffle him up the grid just a little bit. And it's not even just about grid positions, it's more about stability in a team where Mick Schumacher at the moment is in that Haas team that I have to say are struggling in so many areas. And it might also give the Haas team a chance to potentially look for maybe even an American driver. If there's an American driver willing to pay, and F1, I think we touched on this before, didn't we? If F1 are willing to grease the wheels of bringing an American driver over, slot them into an American team just to get an American on the grid, that could all potentially well happen. Bottas replacing Kimi. I don't think so, but you never know. Which pole position will be considered? They've done that one. They should run the international circuit for the sprint race. Well, there's a good argument to say that this sprint race thing, and this is just an experiment, as I said at the beginning, if we get to a point where we like the format and it seems to work, but we don't want it every week, we had some races over the last couple of years where we've done back-to-backs, like Austria. We've just done a back-to-back on the same circuit. Silverstone, we've done that as well in the past, last year, didn't we? So it was the perfect thing to try and mix it up when you've got two races back-to-back, do one of them with a different race weekend format. And it may be that that's the way it goes. Are there any potential loopholes that teams will exploit in sprint races? They usually do, so watch this space, says G. Thompson. It's a good point, and this is exactly what all the teams, of course, will be looking for. The answer to that is I don't know. I can't think of one. I think the challenge this weekend is just going to be, there's the challenge of the technical challenge that everyone always has, but this is much more a challenge now of achieving the technical things that have to be achieved, but in a much tighter time frame. And the teams will have to start thinking about getting ready, in different time frames between practice and qualifying. not being able to work or think and work on the car over a Friday night. Normally one of the biggest areas that all teams work on is Friday night, where the guys back at the team's factories are running driver in the loop simulators all night, testing out setups, testing new components, so that on Saturday morning they can come back into the second practice session and go ahead and do that again. For this weekend, of course, we do have a second practice session, but there's only a very limited amount that can be changed. You can't go changing a massive amount on your car because you're in parc fermé all the way through until that hour practice session, when you are allowed to make some setup changes during the session, and then you're immediately back into parc fermé again. So there are some different protocols that will have to be followed over the course of this weekend. And from an F1 team's perspective, when they're trying to do that in like almost military precision, there's a lot of work that has to go in behind the scenes to make sure everybody, and there's 60, 70 people inside those teams, are all following these new protocols that no one's familiar with, and they have the potential to trip somebody up, like being in the paddock at the wrong times during the curfew, those kind of things. There's potential for stuff to go wrong because it's not the finely tuned, honed schedules that everybody's been working on for years. Atherton Russell says, hit the like button, and he's right. Do it. Hit the like button, please. Do you think F1 would be better if they scrapped parc fermé? Right, Josh Smith, that's a great question, and it depends who you are. I worked in Formula One for a period of time before parc fermé ever existed, and then I worked in, and I'm talking about the Saturday night parc fermé, it was always in parc fermé straight after the Grand Prix. But then I worked in Formula One when they brought in that Saturday night parc fermé, and I can tell you from a member of a team inside a garage, it was the best thing that ever happened, because it sent us home. We had to leave that paddock at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock or whatever it was on a Saturday evening, once the cars were all tucked up in parc fermé and we couldn't work on them. And prior to that, well, we'd be doing all-nighters. We'd be working till goodness knows when, constantly fettling the cars, trying to fine-tune them, find solutions to problems, and if it took us till midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, that's what we did. So parc fermé has a lot of positives, and a lot of people inside that paddock love it. I have to say though, from a perspective of a fan, or the sport as the spectacle as a whole, it has two effects. First of all, if you don't have it, you've got the bigger teams who can basically constantly fine-tune everything right up until the last minute, and you probably end up with an even bigger spread or even bigger gap between the great cars and the cars at the back of the grid, because the bigger teams have more time, more resource, more spare parts to try, more setup options. Whereas if you have a parc fermé situation, the big teams still excel because they're able to operate better in that shorter time frame than the smaller teams, but you just take some of their toys away, and that I think is probably the biggest plus for all of this. And of course it keeps costs down, and it keeps working hours to a more sensible rate. If a car picked up damage in the sprint race, will they start at the back of the grid? If they finish the sprint race last because they crashed out, yes, they'll start at the back. If they get damage but finish the race in 10th position, assuming they can still fix that car, they will start at Sunday's Grand Prix in 10th position. So as with anything, if your cars are in parc fermé on any other Grand Prix weekend between qualifying and the race, but if you pick up damage during qualifying, you go to the FIA, you say, listen, I've got broken floor here, you can come and look at it, you can clearly see it's damaged. I've got another floor that's of exactly the same specification, can I please swap it? And the FIA will give you permission, and then you'll go ahead and make that change. So that's basically exactly the same as it will be between the sprint race and the Grand Prix on the Sunday, so nothing really changes. Rob Graham says, Elvis's mum says, hit the like button or no dessert. I'm not sure if mum's on tonight, but by the way, whoever invited my mum out for dinner last week, that's disgraceful behaviour. She was quite flattered, but yeah, it's my mum, so come on, stay away from that. Andrew Storm, enjoy Friday at Silverstone. Thank you. I really will. I really will enjoy it. I'm doing what you did last week. Beer, beer, beer. It says Nutcracker. Yeah, I couldn't face another beer tonight. Are there other parts like the F1 tyre, like the tyres that F1 can standardise? Yes, there are, and that is going to be happening more and more over the next few years. There are also already a number of parts that are standardised. Things like the ECU. You know, I don't know, some people know this, I'm sure, but McLaren actually make the ECUs and some of the other electronic control boxes for the entire grid. So everybody has exactly the same ECU. Everybody has the same things like cameras and camera pods, the G sensors, the 360 camera on top of the car as well. The halo, of course, is standardized. Yes, we know about the tyres. And what's going to happen is more components like that are going to end up getting standardized on the grounds of saving costs. That's coming in over the next few years. And in fact, the 2022 car will have a number of those on it already. Haven't got the list to hand, so I can't tell you exactly what they are, and I can't remember, but that's happening for sure. Will you do the pit stop for a team in Silverstone? No. They definitely don't need me. I am old and slow these days. Well, hang on. Where are we going here? Bottas to English football. Stop it, Jonathan Moore. What's happening on Thursday, Elvis? Okay, so Tom B, what's happening on Thursday? On Thursday at 3 p.m. UK time, F1 will be live streaming a sort of grand unveiling and a presentation of the 2022 car from Silverstone. They've got a full-size car. They'll be pulling the covers off it and unveiling it, and they'll also, I think there's going to be some talks from various people. Not sure who's on that lineup yet, but they're going to be explaining the car, explaining some of the changes that are coming. It's effectively an online launch for the 2022 regulations. So you can see that streamed on YouTube. I think it's on f1.com and probably elsewhere as well. So keep an eye out for that, because that will be interesting, I'm sure. Do you think F1 can do more for drivers' mental health? Tennis players and footballers get this. Yes, McLaren won race. I do. I've said this before on this stream. I think it's an area that Formula One traditionally has been very, very weak at. And in fact, Formula One, when it comes to drivers, and even the Formula One teams in the most part, actually do very little in that regard. And I'm sure lots of teams will have their own sort of different things that they do today. But it's when you think about football or you think about any other sport, Formula One is this huge team sport. The teams pay millions to employ these drivers. And then when it comes to things like training, fitness training, you know, the drivers turn up on a Grand Prix weekend, they do their business over the course of the weekend, but in between that, they're kind of just left to their own devices to go and train and look after themselves and eat well. The team don't really do anything in that regard. They don't control or even look after, in the most part, the driver's nutrition or fitness or health and well-being or mental health. In the most part, I'm saying here. Now, when I first started at McLaren employed the fitness trainers to look after their drivers. So the trainers were a McLaren employee, and when a Mika Hakkinen or a David Coulthard came along, they got matched up with one of the team's trainers, and that's how it worked. Over time, though, what happened was the drivers began to take that under their own wing and almost employ their own fitness trainers, because they might leave a team, for example. McLaren was a perfect example of this. Kimi Räikkönen was at our team with Marc as his trainer, employed by McLaren. When Kimi left to go to Ferrari, of course he wants to keep that stability. The trainer is one of the key, relationships between a driver and the trainer. So he wanted to take Marc with him, and so instead of Marc trying to be employed by Ferrari, Kimi employed him directly. And now most of the drivers work that way. They employ their own fitness trainers to do that stuff for them. So the teams, my point here is that the teams almost leave the drivers just up to their own devices in between races. It's not quite that straightforward. It's definitely not quite that simple, and I don't want to do teams an injustice, But it's a slightly strange way of working, I think, in a top level sport when a team has so much invested in a driver, they almost just let them go and get on with it themselves until they need them on a Grand Prix weekend. So to answer your point, yes, I think the sport as a whole could and should do a lot more for the drivers, but all of the personnel within this sport, for which it can be stressful, it can be difficult, it can put a huge strain on family life and relationships. And I certainly don't want to make this big hard done by speech here, because it's an amazing opportunity to work in Formula One. I was grateful for every second of it and I loved it. But there are consequences to committing the amount you commit to working in Formula One. And so yes, the sport and the teams are definitely getting much better at this now. Should definitely take that very seriously in looking after those people that give so much to put the show on the road. There we go. How much? So Straight Gamester says, "Hey Mark, how much will the 22 regs change up the grid order in your opinion?" Obviously, well, of course we don't know. One thing I would say about this is it has the potential to shake up the grid, even just if it's just in the beginning, because whenever you get a major rule shake-up, there are loopholes, there are opportunities. Teams will get it right, teams will get it wrong. There's nothing to compare to for that first season. There's not any chance to go and look at another team's car, look at the fastest car on the grid, find out how they interpreted, the regulations, and take that on board or copy it or use it as your own inspiration. You can't have any of that in the first year of a brand new set of regs. So somebody will do a better job than the rest. Now that might manifest itself in that a small team leaps up the grid like a Brawn did by finding something like a double diffuser type scenario. And bearing in mind the entire aerodynamic focus of these new 22 cars shifts away from everything we know right now. There's a huge focus on a different type of underfloor or undercar aerodynamics. And that's a completely new way of thinking. And so there will be a huge amount of work going in. Teams are trying things and simulating things. And, everybody will eventually, of course, converge on something very similar. But in the beginning, you might not get that. The one thing I would say is that obviously the team's best place to deal with something like this are the big teams. And so the most likely scenario is, unless somebody finds some magic bullet that catapults them up the grid, the most likely scenario is that the big teams that we have now, the Mercedes, the Ferraris, the Red Bulls of this world, maybe the McLaren, have the resources, have the people, have the facilities to be able to deal with a rule change better than a much smaller outfit that are operating on a shoestring and having to really balance between this year and next year at the moment. And so the big teams will still be the big teams, but there is definitely scope for a major shake-up if somebody gets it massively right or massively wrong. Did Mercedes spend their tokens? If not, are they still going to? They did spend them, but they haven't said what they spent them on, have they? They're not going to spend them now because I don't think the tokens were for major upgrades, and I think from what I can gather, Mercedes some time ago stopped all development. So unless we're going to see some dramatic change, like an entire rear suspension change, which would be a token spend for Silverstone, I don't think we're going to. I think they would have spent them over the winter. They just haven't told us what they were spent on. Should a Grand Prix weekend only be 2 days with more track action? Maybe like that can be more races in the championship. So that's something that's been under consideration for a long time. I think the teams would love it as we get to more and more races. F1's desperate to climb to 25 races, maybe even 26 races at some point. The teams think that's a terrible idea because they just can't manage with the current numbers of people and the current race format and the current travel and all the things that we do right now. They can't just expand that and expect everyone to deal with it. One solution could have been to compress the weekend into 2 days, so you can get more races every race weekend. The teams are away for a day less on every one of these trips, which over the course of a season makes a big difference, and reorganise the calendar somehow where there's less back and forward, going from Monaco to Canada and then back to Paul Ricard or something. Those things that we've had in recent years make zero sense on so many levels, but from a team perspective, that just increases massively the amount of time you're away, the amount of travel you have to do. So by a bit of reorganisation, that could work. The problem with a 2-day race weekend, of course, is that the promoters have less opportunity to sell tickets. 2 days at a race weekend means 1 day where you just simply can't sell anything to paying punters, and that's how they make their money. Would teams intentionally miss weekends if there became too many races for them? I don't think so. I just don't think it would get to that point. If it gets to a point we have so many races, they have to find a solution to enable that to happen. It's not just the teams; it's everybody involved in Formula One. So I couldn't see it ever getting to that point. Right. I'll tell you what I also wanted to talk about was Mercedes upgrade. So let's talk about what that could be, because looking ahead to Silverstone, of course, we saw in Austria an utterly dominant performance, didn't we, from Max Verstappen and Red Bull. They were almost faultless throughout both weekends. Mercedes were close, but definitely not close enough. McLaren very, very strong in Austria, but Silverstone's a very different circuit, very different demands, really fast, lots of high speed. You're relying on high speed aero, change the direction at high speed. It's somewhere that Mercedes have typically been very, very strong, but you've got to say, with what we're seeing so far from Red Bull, their car seems to have overcome all the things where it was weak in the past. Straight line speed, managing to reduce their drag levels but still maintaining downforce at speed. You've got to say the Red Bull is going to look hot at Silverstone, you would think. There's still this anomaly of new tyres, and we don't know if they're going to have a major impact. I don't think they will, because everyone's tried them and there were no alarm bells ringing then. But Mercedes are bringing an upgrade package, which sounds like it might be relatively major. I don't know what it is. I don't think anybody does yet. But that potentially could have an impact here, because Red Bull have been bringing some things. They brought some new upgrade parts to Austria. I don't know if they've got anything else in the pipeline for Silverstone or not, but they've already got the fastest car. Mercedes, though, now know where their weak points are, particularly given that we had an aero reg change over the winter that's affected Mercedes much more than it affected Red Bull. So they knew exactly where the weak point of the car is. They know what they've got to focus on. And if they found a solution, and they can't just jack the car up to become a high rate car very easily. That's a whole aero design change that would need to go into that. But if they found some tweaks around things like rear brake ducts or floor design that could help with some of their issues, this could change the game. And I think that's perhaps one of the most intriguing things to come out of this weekend. But of course, as I said earlier on, they will only have a much shorter period of time to be able to figure those out. When you bring a big upgrade to a racetrack, you need track time. You want to be going through things like ride height sweeps just to see how the new car effectively responds to that. How does it manage its tyres with the new aero performance that the car might have? And how can you dial that in or out? You've only got an hour on Friday morning or Friday afternoon to be able to do that with a new car, with new tyres, ahead of a new qualifying format on Friday afternoon, Friday evening. So it's a real challenge, but that upgrade could be the thing that potentially keeps Mercedes in this championship. And if it doesn't, maybe we're starting to look already at Red Bull walking away with this season. Right, where are we? Got 10 minutes to go. Red Bull are 3 or 4 tenths ahead. Yeah, I mean they've at certain circuits they have been mighty strong. That's what I'm talking about. Red Bull had 5 truckloads of new parts. Yeah, Red Bull have been bringing upgrades. They haven't relented in this fight, this championship. These opportunities don't come around very often. They've been working towards this for years. They've finally cracked it, and next year, almost nothing that nothing about the performance of this year's car will carry over to next year. And as I said before, it could be a bit of a lottery next year. So this is the one. Red Bull need to make the most out of the opportunity they got in 2021. How are the renovations coming along, says Rory O'Connor. Thanks, Rory. Yeah, good, but just messy, dusty. We had a thunderstorm earlier and I walked into my kitchen and there was a river running through the kitchen floor where it just flooded in under the door where the builders had taken the roof off outside. So all the normal things when you're having a building works done. It's chaos, but it'll be good in the end. Right. Is there a chance that McLaren would swap personnel around next season between Danny and Lando's crews to try to make them more even, like Lewis and Nico did? I mean, there's a chance, but I can't see that's not the reason Daniel's struggling. I think it's slightly different. When it was Mercedes, it's not like a driver had come to a new team. They were two embedded drivers. It's just that one was doing a lot better than the other, and in the interests of fairness, they started to move things around. I think with Daniel, he's made a massive leap from one team into that McLaren organisation with a car that's clearly very different to the one he was used to, and I think it's all about that. It's not about the people. I don't think even Daniel would question for a second that it would be about the people or that the people might help. I think it's all about him trying to find out what he can do as a driver to get the best out of it. Interestingly, Sergio Perez, who also struggled in the beginning, is now really finding his feet, and he's starting to, as I saw him say after last weekend, he's starting to, start to go his own direction with setup. He is no longer just copying Max's setup, which is how he started as a baseline. He's now finding his own way. He's doing his own things. He's going off in different directions to Max. He's quite often had a different car to Max in terms of components or downforce levels, and so he's had to go off in a different direction. I think Daniel Ricciardo, they wanted to do voiceover at work today. I told him Monday would be the worst day, worst day to do voiceover because I was on it last night for the football. So I think Daniel Ricciardo has just got to really almost go back to basics, and this is what he will be doing, but going back to basics just to try and figure out, he's got to start from fresh, hasn't he, and almost write off a few races while he tries some stuff. And again, people like Daniel who need track time, who need testing time, this weekend is not going to be the easiest for them, given they've got a massive lack of that because of the new format. Do you think we should have safety cars in the sprint quali or just immediate red flag like in a normal quali session? Red flags are going to be tricky, aren't they? It is tricky. I think that Michael Massey is going to have a judgment call to make here because, red flags are difficult because there's so much rigmarole around stopping, getting everyone formed back up on the grid and restarting again. And in a race that might only be, I don't know what it is, 15 or 20 laps probably, there's not a huge amount of time to do that. I know you can do it, I know we have done it, and it does depend on the incident, but I think we've got to leave that one, as we always do in a race, up to the race director's call and hope he gets it right. You need some rum, Mark. I don't. It would be beer o'clock in 7 minutes, but not tonight. I saw Daniel at Wimbledon last week. Not a great look. Why don't you think that was a great look, John Norris? What, because he was at Wimbledon, or the look that he had on, the clothes he was wearing? Explain yourself there. I'd like to know more. I think Daniel's confidence is suffering now after so many races with poor performance. Well, Paul Stathers, you're right. I mean, of course it will be. Anybody's confidence would be knocked. We all know how good Daniel is as a racing driver. I don't think anyone's questioning how whether he's lost his talent. He hasn't. But he is having to deal with a very different car that needs very different things. I likened it last week to suddenly writing with your left hand when you've been writing with your right hand all your life. You haven't forgotten how to write. It's just that you can't do it as well in this new way with your left hand because you've always done it with your right hand. And it's kind of like that. The drivers develop their own styles, and it's tiny little nuances about braking and transferring the weight around the car as you turn in, and how you roll off the brake pedal, roll off the steering, get on the throttle. All these little tiny, and we're talking tiny things, but they all make a difference. And you know, you go through your career developing that style, and then when you get to a car where that style simply doesn't work, it's really difficult to just change your style. You know, you've just got to somehow wind it back and almost start again, and almost he might have to develop a new style for him. John Norris says, if he can't focus on his craft because of external issues, then he needs to cut out what's not necessary. No, John, come on. I'm sorry, but you can't criticise a driver for going to Wimbledon because he's not performing in his race car. You know, it may well be that he needs a total detachment from F1, and Wimbledon might have been his escape. It might have been his way of relaxing or his way of enjoying himself. You need any sportsman, and in fact any human, you've got to give them the opportunity to do the things that they know will make them feel better. And that's how you get performance. You don't say, because you're not performing in your race car on Sunday, you're now not allowed to go and do anything other than continually try to practice and get better at your craft. It can't work that way. Sorry, John, I'm not having that one, as you can tell. There we go. Could you see Russell moving to Red Bull if Marc don't offer him a seat? Well, I did see that Helmut Marko had sort of suggested exactly that. I think that's a lot of gamesmanship. I think the word around the paddock is definitely that it's moving towards an announcement that George Russell will partner Lewis Hamilton next year. But Helmut Marko, I think, said if that doesn't happen, he would gladly make an offer for George Russell. But he said there's no way that Mercedes are not going to give George Russell a seat, because it would just be letting one of their greatest assets slip away. So I do think that George Russell seems very comfortable at Mercedes. He has a lot of faith in them. They clearly have faith in him, and I think we're going to get that partnership announced at some point. And look, even if we don't, I still think that George Russell would stay loyal. My feeling would be that he'd stay loyal to Mercedes. That seat's coming at some point, isn't it? It's going to be there for the taking, and I'm pretty sure there's not many people in that paddock that don't think George Russell will be in a Mercedes either this coming year or the one after. Hi from South Africa, Sam Keyser. Hi mate, thank you very much for joining in. Hope all's well out there. Tyre compounds and pressures different this weekend. Well, we have been speaking about tyres, but as we've just brought it up, it's an opportunity for me to get out my tiny F1 tyres again. I don't know what purpose these things serve, but I just think they're quite cute. So yes, we did discuss tyres earlier on. There are new structures for the tyres, constructions. The compounds, I actually can't remember what the compounds are. Should have noted that. Somebody will tell me what the compounds are for this weekend. But yes, it is going to be a bit of figuring out tyres in that much shortened practice session on Friday, and that's part of this big challenge of this weekend. Right, 2 minutes. Bottas to Mercedes junior team Aston Martin. Could happen, but that would mean losing either Lance Stroll or Sebastian Vettel, and quite frankly, I don't think that they want to do that with either of those. Lance Stroll, not only because his dad owns the team, but I think he's actually doing a decent job, and Seb is also starting to find his feet in that team, so I'm not sure there's an opening going to be there. Redmond Barry says paperweights for the tyres. They are very lightweight. Do you have all three compounds of tiny tyres? I do. Look at this. I've also, look at that. Look. Yeah, there you go. All three compounds, and I'm not even sure why, but they chucked in a blue one, even though it's got no tread. But there you go. Utterly pointless, but cute. Where's the best place to sit at Silverstone? Oh my goodness, the best thing about Silverstone, I think, is that if you have an open ticket, you just move around. You have the scope to move around the venue, and that's probably the best thing to do. Obviously, the Maggots and Beckett's complex, if you're in one of those grandstands, that is epic through there. Modern Formula 1 cars through there are just fantastic. But move yourself around over the course of the weekend if you're going. See it from different places. F1 cars around Silverstone are special. I think these particular cars, particularly, very, very fast, epic. It's going to be great. And that brings us to the end of this show. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going to bed. But listen, thank you so much. If you could just drop a quick like before you go, I'd really appreciate that. It does make a difference to how these videos are served up by YouTube, how successful they become. But thank you. I appreciate all of you for dipping in, for watching the whole thing. If you've been here for the whole thing, I massively appreciate it. Those of you that have been in the chat all afternoon, really big up for you guys. Big thank you. I have been dipping in and out, not so much today because I've been busy, but I always try and keep an eye on it. So thank you very much. Have a great week. Those of you going to Silverstone, enjoy it. It's going to be epic. Give me a shout if you're around on Friday, and if I can catch up with any of you, I definitely will. But enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Cheers, folks. See you later.